Right, good morning everyone and welcome to another VLGA Connect live panel, and thank you very much for joining us. We are expecting a fairly large group for today's discussion on electing the Mayor. Can I firstly, on behalf of the VLGA, acknowledge the traditional owners of country throughout Victoria and recognise their continuing connection to land, waters and community. We pay our respects to the traditional owners, their elders past, present and future, and to their cultures. And indeed to wherever you're joining us from today, whatever country you are part of. Before we get into the panel, and I'll introduce the members in just a moment, I'd like to call on Catherine Arndt, the CEO of the VLGA, to welcome you all and recognise our sponsors for today's event. Catherine, hello.
Hi, Chris, and thank you for that introduction, and welcome everyone. It's fantastic to see so many faces in the room and so many familiar faces. I'd like to acknowledge all of the councillors that are with us today. In particular, I'd also like to acknowledge the VLGA President, Councillor Denise Massoud, who joins us today, and also VLGA Board Member, Councillor Josh Fergus, who is in the room also. I would like to acknowledge Justicia Lawyers, who are a supporter of the VLGA Connect live panel program. And today we're in for a fantastic and really timely discussion about the role of Mayor and the importance of leadership generally when we look at the role of a council and a group of councillors coming together to deliver some pretty important stuff on behalf of their municipal community. And I will let Chris introduce the panelists and hand back over to him.
Thank you very much, Catherine, and great to see such a large gathering of councillors and mayors from across the state too for the session today. Wonderful to have you all with us. I'm going to briefly introduce each of the members of the panel and then we'll spend some time with each of them. So in order, I'd firstly like to say hello to the Mayor of the City of Greater Shepparton, Councillor Kim O'Keefe. Hi, Kim.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. Such a pleasure to be here with you all.
Great to have you with us. We have Ian McCormack, who is coming to us from Alberta in Canada. Ian is an author and a strategic consultant and spends his time pondering all sorts of governance questions from the local government perspective. Hi, Ian. Good morning to you.
Well, I would say good morning, but it's not. I was debating whether I should have my morning coffee or my evening glass of wine. It's 7:30 in the evening here, so I'm looking forward to having an opportunity to have a conversation with many of you. So thanks, Chris. Thanks,
Ian. I thought you might remind me of the time difference there. And a very good friend of VLGA Connect is Tony Rounich from Hunt & Hunt Lawyers, who is also a former mayor and councillor. Tony, good morning and welcome to you.
Always great to be a part of the VLGA panels, Chris.
So let's get into some quality time with our panelists. It's that time of the year, as you well know, where most councils are considering that question of who's going to lead us for the next period of time. And Councillor Kim O'Keefe from Greater Shepparton, this is your third term as Mayor, correct, Kim, coming to an end shortly?
Yeah, that's correct. And look, honestly, it just goes so fast. Particularly this past year, it feels like we're 3 months into the year and here we are back, looking at the mayor election again. But yeah, it's gone very fast, Chris, but loved my role, absolutely.
And the first year of a new council term is your third time as mayor, with the Local Government Act changes as well in force. Have you noticed much different being mayor this year as to we'll get to the COVID thing in a moment too, by the way.
Yep. Sure.
But this year, as opposed to the other 2 terms you had as mayor?
Yeah, look, for lots of reasons as well. We've had 6 new councillors out of 9, so that changes, the mechanics a bit of the organisation of the councillor group. But yeah, just obviously in the mayoral role, having that bit of experience, I think it's been a great opportunity, to be in this role, having that background and experience when there has been some changes there in regard to, showing particularly leadership and showing particularly on new councillors, hopefully setting a standard and a tone, which I think is really important when you get new ones on board. But look, there's some challenges there, but I always think if you can have a positive mindset and really lead in a positive manner, in an assertive manner, but also always be respectful. I think, that's always the secret, being a good mayor, and also appreciating each other's differences is also a very big thing.
This recent period of time has been particularly different and I dare say challenging for you as mayor, and most people would be aware Greater Shepparton was a COVID-19 outbreak centre. you seem to be all over the media, Kim, very much at the disposal of whoever wanted to find out what was happening. What sort of observations do you have on being a mayor in a time of crisis after that experience?
Yeah, look, it was extraordinary. Within a week, we went from one case, to having 20,000 people almost in isolation, which is a third of our population, a third of our workforce. It was extraordinary, Chris. But look, I think at that time, it's when you do have to show true leadership and, collaborate with others, be there for the community. I mean, stand up and make sure that there's that connection, because I think that was the biggest issue. What does this mean? What's the uncertainty? How are we going to manage this? And it does take time. But yeah, within a week, there was a lot of things that had to be put in place. And I'm really proud, not only of council and how we responded, GV Health, but the community, how we just all, rolled our sleeves up and worked out pretty much where we belonged in that particular crisis. But the media was extraordinary. It'd be 6 a.m, right through to late at night, right across the state. There was some international interest as well. But I think just continually to show, positivity, we'll get through it, step up, roll your sleeves up, try and erase the panic a bit if you can, because I think that's a very uncertain time where you have to really continue to shine what you've always done, and what I've always done is to try and just be really strong and positive and calm. I think that was a really big thing. We had emergency management step in. We had Defence Force Australia come into our community. Deb Abbott from Emergency Management Victoria was sensational. I think at the very start we were all sort of feeling in this whirlwind, but she calmed us down. And I think that's a secret, just really collaborating, work out what our role would be and how we can support the others, whichever industry it was. But yeah, food relief was a very big thing, trying to get people in isolation food when you've got that many numbers. But so many community members, stepped up. People were there for their neighbours, doing shopping. They weren't in isolation. It was an extraordinary experience, but one that I think we're very proud of. And I've had lots of phone calls too from other mayors, and particularly those in recent times that have been locked down. And I think we are, sort of a bit of a case study, if you like, of, what we experienced, the learnings from that, and moving forward, how we could perhaps be a little bit more prepared in the future, hopefully not for the same type of experience, but other emergency crises. Who knows, what's around the corner.
What sorts of things were those other mayors looking for from you in terms of insights and guidance? Very
clear question. How did you manage it so quickly? And the big answer, the easy one to that really was just getting tested. We had thousands of people. We had people waiting up to 8 hours. Council stepped up and got 5 more testing sites in place, 2 drive-through testing sites working. We had trouble getting marquees, to get these testing sites, functionable. But yeah, once you get the people tested, you then know where the pandemic is hitting, and you can put those people into isolation, and hopefully, as we did, cap it very quickly. We got up to nearly 180 active cases. We're now down to 3, which is incredible, but we are not being complacent. I think this is the very strong message at the moment. The Delta strain is, the virus is still there. We just have to continue to get tested, slightest symptoms, all the things we know that we should be doing. So very much just following the process, and our community was outstanding. So you're really proud of that.
How do you think you would have handled that, Kim, if this was your first term as mayor?
I've had a business here for 30 years. I've always been embedded in community. I think it would just be my attitude towards most things. You just have to deal with what's in front of you. But I think having that experience, having the connections to others, having that longevity of 3 years, you have some great connections, obviously with GV Health, the CEO there, and a lot of locals that work in leadership roles that stepped up, contacted me to see what they could do. So I think just that build up of, having those relationships was a strength during that time for sure. And knowing who I could reach out to as well, that I knew would step up and help me.
So given we're at that period where councillors are now thinking about, who should be mayor for the next year, how relevant do you think is this recent experience that you've had in the considerations that councillors should be having for who's going to lead them through this next phase?
Yeah, look, I think it has to be more than just one incident. Obviously over a period of time, you build up that confidence, and that you can prove that you can do the job. But look, I think coming into this election, and particularly when we've just had an election, 12 months in, there's always going to be new aspiring mayors. And I think if you ever think you're the only one that can do that job, that's a mistake. But in saying that, you should always have the right person at the time for the role. So, I love the role. I would do it the whole time I'm on council, if I had the choice, because I want to always be there to the best and most capacity that I can be for my community to make the most of those opportunities. But that doesn't mean I'm the only one that can do that, So if I'm not elected, I will be be very supportive and doing all I can to support the mayor, because I think when you're elected as a councillor, you're one of, in our case, 9, and you should always be supportive. You know, I've had 3 years as mayor, 1 year as deputy, and I didn't get elected as mayor last year. I said at the time, I was a little bit disgruntled because I was deputy chair of regional cities at the time, and I wanted to get the chair role, and I could see that carrot. So I was a little bit thinking, you know, keep me there. We're so close. There's a couple of big carrots, but I didn't get it, and I was annoyed and a bit disappointed. But you've got to dust that off pretty quick. And I did. The decision was made. Yes, I felt bruised, and behind closed doors, I was disappointed. But you've then got to go, okay, the decision's made. Now let's just move on and support the new mayor. And I came out very positively. Very fortunate to have been elected really well at the last election, and that gave me the opportunity to get the mayor role. And I do say I got chair of regional cities Victoria this time around, so I'm ticking that because it's just those opportunities for your region. If you can reach out and make those opportunities greater and bigger, I think that's the role of the mayor. You've got to look broadly what your role can achieve for your community. And the thing I find most extraordinary about the role of the mayor is it is so broad. You know, when I've had my past life in my business, I'm very focused on what I do. When I got the opportunity to be mayor, I probably did not realise how broad it was. But in saying that, how broad the opportunities were for our community as well. So it's been a great learning for me, and every single day on the job. And for those aspiring mayors, you know, I did question my experience, you know, my intelligence, all those things. Will I be able to do this job well? And I think if you're smart enough to, be supported by others so that you can learn on the job, you will end up learning the things you need to know along the way. And hopefully each time you become stronger and better within the role. I do believe the mayor should have at least 2 years. We only do every 12-month election of our mayor, and I don't think that's enough for a first-time mayor. You're just starting to sort of find your feet, build those connections and those relationships. And then if it ends, it's a sort of a shame. Well, I had the 2 years, then a year off, and then another year in. So I've been very, very fortunate. Very interesting, just quickly, our mayoral election last time, we had 4 put their hand up. So it went into a ballot, like a barrel. You draw the name out. That was very stressful, probably the most stressed I've been at a council meeting. I was very lucky, and it did come down to luck. I wasn't pulled out first, I wasn't knocked out, and I knew the person that had been knocked out was probably my main competition. And if everyone stuck to what they said they would, doesn't always happen. I was very lucky to get this term. So I've really embraced this year. And just finishing up, I broke my ankle, as you know, 9 weeks ago. Then we had this extraordinary COVID experience, and I was thinking, wow, I don't want to go out if I'm not elected on a low, you know, with these incidents. But in actual fact, being there for the community during this crisis, there's no other place I would rather be. And I'm so grateful that I've been able to be there for the community during this past period of time. So yeah, I've had an incredible learning experience, and I will continue to do as much as I can, whether I'm mayor or not, within my councillor role. I think that's a great message to all councillors. You know, you don't have to be the mayor to be effective.
Has the new Local Government Act, which has got some different powers and functions for the mayor, has that impacted greatly or not at all on the way you've carried out the role this time around?
Look, I think there's a little bit more authority, you know, within the mayoral role, but I think if you've got a good relationship with your councillors from the very beginning, you should be able to have those tough conversations. You know, if there's issues of councillor behaviour, there's issues within the community that you feel needs to be pulled up, I think I've always been fairly comfortable to be able to, you know, have a respectful relationship. Although in saying that, we had mediation at one point, you know, with a councillor, but I never broke down my respect with that person. You may disagree on things, you may not agree with what they're doing, but as long as you have that level of respect, hopefully you can work through those challenges. And I think that's always the goal, that it doesn't become personal, doesn't become me against you. It becomes, let's work through this situation the best we can together. I think that's a really important thing to get a good result.
So Tony Rownick, welcome, Managing Principal of Hunt & Hunt Lawyers, former Mayor and Councillor, as we've said. You've worked with a lot of councils in your practice over the years. I'm really interested, Tony, firstly, and welcome, to hear whether you think the new Act has brought any visible sort of changes to the way the mayors function around the state so far.
Look, I think it has. I think that particularly the focus on this time around on one of the responsibilities of the mayor now under the Local Government Act 2020 is to be responsible for encouraging or helping ensure that the councillor group observe the appropriate behaviours as per the councillor code of conduct. And I think that what's happened this time, of course, is there's been mandatory councillor induction training for the first time. And the content of that training has focused often on some of these new provisions. And so one of the elements of the mandatory councillor induction training was training on the dispute resolution procedures under the Code of Conduct. And I know I was a small part of the VLGA mandatory councillor induction training program led by Steve Cooper, the Chief of Staff there. And what we had to do was use the regulations, the local government's governance and integrity regulations to map out that mandatory content. So councillors were told about these dispute resolution procedures. And interestingly, I haven't got any stats, Chris, but I think just anecdotally, there are more councils, I think, that have invoked some of these code of conduct processes, you know, this early in the council term than previously. And I wonder if that's just a case of some additional, you know, awareness amongst councillors of the processes. But also, I think my observation would be that some mayors have proved themselves really able in this space in terms of using these new powers and exercising these new responsibilities. But by the same token, I think some mayors have really struggled with it and have found it really difficult. And we're seeing that, you know, the results of that in terms of some of the difficulties some of the councils are having early in their term.
Which could be one of the things that's feeding into the minister's view that a cultural review is needed. And I know that's not what today's all about. The other thing you mentioned is the mandatory training. And I would be interested to hear from the councillors in the room, perhaps through the comments, on their thoughts on how effective that was in preparing them. There's already a couple of comments there, because there is a view that it hasn't really gone far enough to prepare particularly new councillors for the responsibility. Would you agree with that, Tony?
Absolutely. I think that so when we look at those the compulsory content of that training, it was about, a lot of it was about giving councillors facts. You know, what are the powers of the mayor? What are the responsibilities of the mayor? What are the powers of the CEO? What are the relevant provisions in the Local Government Act? But there wasn't a lot of, certainly in the mandatory element, there wasn't a concentration on equipping councillors with some of those soft skills in terms of dealing with conflict resolution, communicating together, you know, effectively, maintaining good relationships when there's going to be lots of, you know, hardy debate. And I think that if the state government, you know, reflects now, you know, as we approach, you know, in the next council election in a few years' time, what ought to be the content of that mandatory training, one of my suggestions would be, do we look at having, you know, people with appropriate expertise helping councillors with some of those skills around working together and resolving conflict, particularly helping potential mayors. And another example would be one of the powers that and responsibilities that the mayor has is around leading the performance review process, the annual performance review process with the CEO. Now that's the biggest contract the council has, and we don't in any of the mandatory training actually equip councillors. How do you deal with a sense that perhaps, you know, the council group would like the CEO to concentrate on some other things? How do you work with a contract? How do you work with KPIs in a contract, you know, the key performance indicators? Because what I've seen just observationally is that sometimes you'll see council groups fall out with their CEO to the extent that they, you know, terminate the CEO's position. And yet over the previous lots of performance reviews, there hasn't really been a level of engagement with the CEO about, what elements they'd like to change in the CEO's approach. So I think councillors understandably sometimes don't really know how to use those tools. So I think some of that might come into consideration for future induction training.
What do you say to councillors in the room, Tony, that might be grappling with this almost conflict that we see at councils where, they want to have the person who's best equipped to lead them, but there's also almost this, it's somebody else's turn, and these unwritten sort of agreements that were made at the start of the term, etc., the political agendas, I guess. How do councillors navigate that appropriately, do you think?
I think that more and more that consideration around, who's been a councillor for the longest period, or, it was her turn, she did it last time and he did it the time before, so it's her term this time. I think those sort of considerations ought to become, less important, particularly under the new provisions where mayors do have heightened powers and responsibilities. So I think, interpersonal skills are really important. Ability to deal with disputes, to empathise with other councillor viewpoints, to remain, calm, not defensive, be respectful when, strong views are being put at either end in the chamber and you're, chairing a meeting as the mayor. I think, another consideration when you look at, the cohort of councillors and you're choosing who's going to be the mayor is having someone with an ability to forgive and forget, to be able to move on, to be able to put, a previous debate that they lost aside and not hold a grudge or resentments. Ability to help facilitate a compromise where council's deadlocked and there are strongly held, opposing views. I think they're really relevant considerations, and so it's not just so much like, let's give it to Tony because, he's a nice guy and, he's supported me along the way, so it's his turn to be the mayor. What's better for the overall group might be having someone, even someone whose political views I might not agree with, or whose priorities I might not agree with, but I think them as a mayor, they have qualities that are able to bring the group together and deal with some of these conflicts, or potentially deal with crises like Tim's faced in Shepparton recently.
Tony, you've been a mayor and a councillor in a former life almost. Do you think it's a harder job now than it was then?
Yeah, I reckon it is. I think the advent of social media is a really big thing, and I think that we've seen just the last election, the heightened use of social media and the really cutting commentary that's used there, and I guess as a mayor back in my day, it was a case of you get the local weekly community newspaper and you'd read it and see what they were saying about you, but there wasn't that instantaneous commentary that can be quite anonymous and cutting on some of the social media. And I think also, we're in a world where people sort of make quick judgments from TV and images that they see, and we're the exceptions, this group here, in that we're engaged and we're listening. And I think it's a much more difficult task sometimes to engage with the community when there are so many other options out there for the community to spend their time with. So yeah, I think it has got more difficult.
And I'm reminded while you're saying that about social media, there's a case going on in Tasmania at the moment where a general manager and a mayor have sued a Facebook page moderator for defamation. Don't need to say too much more about that, but it's another sign of the complexity of being in that space at the moment, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. And I think we're going to increasingly see this. And we see elements of this in Victoria and other states as well. And I think it's certainly something for consideration in relation to the future election, the use of social media by candidates and against council candidates too.
Thanks, Tony. We'll give you a chance to take a breath there. And I want to bring in our last panel member now, Ian McCormack, who's sitting there in Alberta, Canada, probably thinking, wow, this system just sounds crazy, although maybe it's not. Ian, welcome. How does this all compare with the Canadian experience?
Chris, it sounds crazy familiar, actually. I mean, the details are somewhat different, most likely. The rules are a little bit different, of course, and but the principles tend to remain the same kind of throughout. It's funny, you know, whenever I get asked to present or speak to a group of people who aren't Canadian, one of the first things they're really kind of interested in are some of the differences between the system that you have and the system that we have. And some of that may beget some of the results that you're looking at, but some of it we may actually learn some things from you as well. So there are differences, of course. I would suggest, just for context reason, if you're interested, that in Canada, much like in Australia, local government is more appropriately or more accurately described as something that is as looked after as a creature, if you like, of the states or our provinces. So there is no homogeneous local government structure from coast to coast to coast in Canada. And of course, like you, we have a significant portion of our country which is very lightly populated. Ours is in the far north, of course, just because it's so cold. If we look at the rural parts of our country, by and large, mayors are elected like your mayors are, from within a council that is elected from popular vote. So, and that also exists too in a lot of our very small municipalities. We have some kind of ridiculously small municipalities that I have no idea how they sustain themselves with 100 or 200 or 300 people. It's probably not that hard to choose a council or a mayor from that group, of course. If we look at some of the larger urban centers, we see something that's quite different from the most part, in that almost all urban centers in Canada elect mayors popularly and for 4 years. So some of what Kim had talked about and what Tony had talked about, and you referenced as well, about some of the back and forth a little bit on whose turn, if you like, is it to become mayor, is moot. That sometimes happens with a deputy mayor role. However, that often just rotates as well. But the mayor is usually elected at large, if you like, or at popular vote. And I'd say that probably 95% of our urban municipalities are that way. And so as such, the mayors are elected for full terms. I would agree too, is with something that Councillor Mayor O'Keefe had said about the learning curve to being a mayor. And I think one of the advantages to the longer term of people in that role is they can spend that one full cycle, if you like, a year, coming up to speed on what the role really entails, after which they reach their point of effectiveness or maximum effectiveness, if you like. So there certainly are some advantages to that too. Something else that somebody mentioned too, I think it was Tony, about the mandatory induction training. That's new for us as well. Here we do it, of course, every 4 years. We call it orientation. And it's a bit of a combination of an onboarding process, which I like to talk about. This is where the parking spot, here's your keys and that sort of thing. This is where the coffee machine is. And an orientation to the role as well, which is some of what Tony had referenced about there being fundamentally no difference between someone who gets elected to be a mayor or somebody who then gets appointed to be elected to be a councillor or appointed to become a mayor, other than any other citizen, with the exception, of course, if they got more votes than the other people do. We also see kind of an interesting quirk here is in our legislation here in where I am in Alberta, our local government or municipal government act, we call it, makes it mandatory for municipalities to put on an induction for all newly elected members within 90 days of an election, but doesn't actually make it mandatory for the members to attend. That sometimes we get around that through codes of conduct that are adopted by the individual city or town or rural municipality as well. Something I have seen that's worked quite effectively, however, to get away from that, if you use the metaphorical fire hose of knowledge that's pumped into a newly elected person as soon as they get elected. I've been kind of calling it a drip type induction, if you like, sort of that ongoing professional development, almost a triage, so that you learn what you have to learn just before you actually need it. And by the time a year has passed or 9 months has passed, you stand a fighting chance as a new elected member to have a pretty good understanding of what's happening within your municipality. So I'm not sure if that's exactly where you wanted me to go with this, Chris, but I would suggest as a final note that the systems, your system and the Canadian system, is much more similar than our system, probably, and yours, and the system in the United States, which is where I also work just a little bit.
No, that's really good context, Ian. And what I neglected to mention, but we'll do so now, is you're a published author. I love the title of the book you brought out last year, Who's Driving the Grader and Other Governance Questions. And you're working on a new book, which is about the successful attributes of civic leadership, of mayors. And I guess that's the heart of what we wanted to get to with you today. What's the magic recipe here that you're seeing come out for, the best mayor possible?
It's part of it is nature and part of it is nurture. And I would not be a very good author if I didn't actually stick a copy of my book up here in front of me as well, Who's Driving the Grader and Other Governance Questions. I know there are some people, Steve Cooper has read it, and I think Catherine might have read it as well, and some others had reached out for me too. The other piece to this is the next book, and you referenced that, Chris, and it is currently titled The DNA of Great Leaders. And it's the 25 attributes of what I have seen in the best functioning or highest functioning mayors and CEOs, chief executive officers rather than the administrative folk, and maybe executive directors. As I have had a chance to work with probably hundreds of local governments, I have seen some themes emerge in what creates an effective mayor and where some people struggle even though they hold that title. And I differentiate significantly between a leader and an authority figure. Ideally, they are both one and the same. However, it's not uncommon, particularly in populist governments, for leaders for people to want to be elected to be an authority figure, just wanting to be the boss, wanting to tell me what to do. And so there's a bit of a continuum I've developed from public service at one end to self-service at the other. And while there's nobody in elected office that I've found at one end or the other, people do fall on one side of that spectrum about, are they in it for themselves or are they in it for public good? So anyway, as I was working through that, I've developed kind of this working list of 25 attributes of the best functioning mayors. And I've broken it into 3 major areas. The first one is about personal attributes. And of the 25, I'd say, well, there are 10 of the attributes that we listed in there. And they are the attributes of an individual who brings internally. So this is kind of the nature part of the human, if you like. So different things that people have a natural proclivity towards or can't do. So examples of those would be not holding grudges. Make a decision, it becomes a council decision and move on. You either can do that or you can't. The ability to self-reflect, to create some time for yourself as an elected official, away from the thrust and parry of local office, and perhaps away from what happens within your own family as well, to become and remain a whole person. And people, again, either seem to have that or they don't. The third one is one that I've seen happen more and more frequently, and that's the ability to manage a crisis. So that calm under pressure. Now, interestingly in this, I see Kim is smiling a little bit at this one. And I had spoken to her, I interviewed Kim for this book as well, which is, so I put her within this list. And I had spoken to her before the crisis, the COVID crisis in Shepparton as well. So it was interesting to actually watch this unfold after I had spoken to her. So anyway, my take on this is you've got these personal attributes of these well-functioning mayors, but then you also have community leadership. And again, Kim mentioned this in relation to becoming mayor as well. There seems to be, for some people, a natural progression from being a community volunteer or a community activist to becoming involved in the community to the place where you finally put your name on a ballot and you get elected. And to me, some of the attributes that fit within here and make a good mayor are things like humility, the recognition that I am, as a mayor, I'm a representative of my community. I'm no better, I'm no worse than the other people. I'm elected because I represent them. I also put vision into this as well. And you could put a capital V vision or a small v vision, it doesn't matter to me, but it's the ability to think beyond, say, a week from next Tuesday, to think about my community 20 years from now or a generation from now. What makes it different, and how can I contribute to making it better over that time? And the third in this community leadership piece would be understanding the mantle of responsibility. And those people who have, if you like, organically grown into the role, I think, really do have or have developed an understanding of how that actually works, that they see the role as something that they have inherited from somebody else and will pass on to somebody after them. So they are through there in a transitory fashion to make their community better than it was when they inherited it, and recognize that the next person is going to do the same thing as well. The third group of attributes I've looked at in the best functioning mayors are technical, and I call them governance skills. And I've developed, there are 9 of these. So some of them are pretty basic, like the ability to run an effective meeting. I don't think people are born with this, well, maybe unless they're twins or something in the womb, but the ability to run an effective meeting, the ability to recognize skill in others that the mayor can leverage. The mayor doesn't necessarily have to be, if you like, the smartest person in the room on all the topics, but it's pretty smart to be able to recognize where those other smarts lie. Another one here is keeping confidences. Whenever we are asked to investigate a municipal government that has gone wrong for some way, it's typically because somebody found out because that metaphorical brown envelope was stuck under somebody's door, or somebody posted something on Facebook that they ought not to have done. My take on local government, and the mayor in particular, is they should know more about their community than anybody else, including their spouse. Because there are things that are happening behind the scenes, behind closed doors, in confidential closed meetings that need to stay that way. And that can be learned. There's that saying about knowledge being power, but to me, I think knowledge is only power until it's shared. You hold the knowledge to yourself, you actually have more power than somebody else because it's more broadly spaced. The final thing I wanted to mention here is something that is a bit of a difference, if you like, between Australia and Canada. We call, what you call a CEO, we call a CAO, or Chief Administrative Officer. And I think one of the real strengths of a mayor is recognizing, and I've called it CEO versus CEO versus CEO, that the chief elected official understands their role and also understands that they are not the chief executive officer of either the municipality or of a company, if you like. And so don't treat local government like a private business. Don't commit the local government to things they ought not to be doing, and really understanding the role of mayor, the role of council, and the role of the individual councillor. So Chris, you asked a fairly short question there, and I recognize that as an author, I could probably speak the rest of the night on this, but I suspect the morning, that you'd like to have go into other things as well.
No, that's great. I think that's what we were looking for, those attributes, that I can see from the chat that people are already wanting to dig into that a little bit. So we'll open up questions in just a second. I just want to get any observations on that from perhaps Kim as a current mayor. Does that resonate with you, Kim, as a list of attributes for a successful mayor?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, Ian and I have spoken before, and I think it's really important also, probably the only thing I'm probably missing out of that conversation is that the community absolutely has to come along for the ride as well. They want to feel included and they want to feel part of your life, I suppose, in many ways. So I think the connection to community within the role, and particularly your community that elected you, I think is up there, in my top sort of 3 things: to really be present for your community, to be engaged, and and to listen, obviously. But I think it's so important in a mayoral role that your community almost feel like, they're part of your journey. They are. They're part of your success. They're part of your journey, and working together, I think, is such a big thing. And I absolutely try and get that out to my community as much as I can. We do it anyway with consultations going out to community, but how you do that often can be done so much better. Many a time it's almost like, let's share this experience again, and let's, you be part of this journey. So that's a big thing for me. It's not just about me being in the mayor role and going, yay, I'm the mayor and I'm going to run around and do my thing. I want the community to be involved in that, and my fellow councillors. It's very important when you speak as the mayor, you are representing not only your community, but also your fellow councillors, so that they're part of the journey. Otherwise, you often get that divide. So I think, relationships are really important with the community and with your fellow councillors, for sure.
Perhaps a provocative question. I know some councils do this. I don't get a sense that it's widespread. should all of that, and this is for anyone on the panel, should all of that be spelled out in a position description that goes with the role of the mayor?
The short answer to me is yes. And the reason is I don't think there's a great understanding of what the role actually entails. That people think it's going to be about cutting ribbons and giving speeches rather than land use planning and making see how short to cut the grass, or in Canada, how deep the snow has to be before you shift it. So we've started doing things like orientations or workshops for people who are interested in the role, even before the election happens. So the tire kickers can come and ask questions of a current elected official, can understand what the role is, what the role isn't, and either decide to continue with the election process or to abandon it and perhaps serve their community in another way. So if the role was clear, if you like a job description or a role description, I think that would probably be something useful. It's not going to stop your one issue candidate who's just mad about something, but it might help provide some greater clarity to the other people who just want to serve their community.
Kim, I should declare that 20 years or so ago, I was working at Greater Shepparton, and I know there was a position description for the mayor. Is that still in place there?
Yeah, there is. There is a description of what the mayoral duties would be and what their responsibilities are, but we all know it's even broader than that. And I think it's a really good point that Ian's raised. Yes, you get to do the wonderful civic duties, cutting the ribbons, being, citizenship's my favourite thing I get to do. But also your council meetings, your briefings, the really important stuff where you're making very important decisions for your community. And I'm always mindful that I need to do my due diligence when I'm making, those decisions, and that they are informed and that the community are a part of that as well. A lot of things used to go on behind closed doors, and now because we live stream our council meeting, and if you come into that meeting not informed and not knowing your stuff, you're going to be pretty pulled up, fairly easily to know you're not knowing what you're talking about. So I think that, again, that open exposure to the community. But the mayoral role, as I said to you in my opening, is so broad, but the opportunity for a place like regional Victoria where I live, I see that incredible opportunity. And we've done live streaming internationally where we've been able to run on the sand, say, Greater Shepparton's a wonderful place, please think about coming here, the reasons why. And we've got $160 million investment out of that opportunity. There's so many opportunities, 400 jobs, So I look at it at what is my best or my priorities as far as my community goes at the moment, looking obviously COVID recovery and all those things that are impacting, supporting local businesses. So you have to prioritise your role to a certain point as well as the things you have to get through, So at the moment, yeah, of course, we're really looking at COVID recovery, supporting locals, but also looking at opportunities post-COVID, that'll come into our community, and we need to be ready for that as well. So it is so broad, but you have to work with others, and we have to work together to really work on those priorities, but always opportunities that may be coming over your shoulder that you've got to grab at the time, because you just want the best thing for your community, and we want to progress, we want opportunities, but more than anything, we want our community to live in a great town, a great place, that they feel they're well looked after from the council. So it is such an incredibly broad space, being on council, being a councillor, being a mayor. But you have many things, you wear many hats, but you've just got to always think of the opportunity at the time today. What's my best way of being productive within my community?
Thanks, Kim. And I do want to get to audience Q&A, but just quickly to give Tony an opportunity to comment on that particular issue.
Look, I actually think a position description would be a great thing, really as a bit of a reference point and a reminder for the mayor and the councillor cohort sometimes when things get tough, because I think it's all very well sort of now for us to have a sort of theoretical chat about what's an ideal mayor and what qualities they would have. But of course, the reality, I think, is that everyone who runs for council, including people who become mayors, they have a personal agenda to a degree. It's not, I'd like to say that everyone runs just to be absolutely just, I'm here to serve the community. And absolutely there's an element of that. But I think the reality is people think, what are the, I've got some key issues that I want to bring to the fore. There's some community infrastructure I want to promote, or some change to community well-being. And for some, and not a majority of councillors, but for a significant proportion, they do run for council because they see it as a stepping stone in a political, for other political roles. So I think having a position description that talks about the mayor perhaps rising above some of those personal agendas would be useful, because I think at times to be a good mayor, you do need to sort of sacrifice an element of your own, agenda to think, well, what's best for the group overall? How are we going to, I can promote my own agenda here and be seen as the, be well known in the community, but to the detriment of the group. How can I work, and concentrate and give energy to making the group more functional? And I think if that was spelled out a little in a formal type document, that I think that would encourage mayors to do that more, because yes, as the reality is, it takes a fair bit of ego, personal agenda, those sort of things are reasons why any of us put ourselves forward to become councillors or a mayor, for instance. So, you can't do both things at once sometimes.
Thanks, Tony. That's a good point. So, Catherine, let's open it up for some comments or questions from the audience, because I know the chat window's been buzzing.
Look, it has been, Chris. Thank you for that. And wow, I've certainly got more out of the panelists today than I was anticipating in terms of the generosity of the information that all of the panelists have shared with us. I think just picking up on that last conversation and going back, Chris, to the question you asked, which was also something that Councillor Josh Fergus had popped in the chat, and that was, how do we embed almost this culture within councils where the group of councillors do look at appointing the best person for the job, as opposed to for some of those political reasons that we've already talked about. It was interesting, Chris, you and I spoke with the Deputy Commissioner of IBAC the other day, David Wolfe, and he was talking to us about a report that IBAC, or a survey that IBAC recently did into the perceptions of council staff in local government, and in particular looking at risks of corruption. And one of the things that came through in the feedback from that survey was an overwhelming sense from respondents that one of the greatest risks and potential risks for corruption does lie at that leadership level, that is at the council level, not in that the group of councillors themselves will engage in corrupt conduct, but rather the need for that group of councillors to set the culture for the council. And how do we achieve that, I guess, that embedding of an ethical culture, one where some of those single policy issues or political agendas are set aside so that the group of councillors in fact set the tone and role model the behaviours that they want for the council itself. So Josh, I'm not sure if you wanted to add anything to the conversation, given that you did ask that question.
Yeah, thanks, Catherine. Sorry, just unmuting myself. Yeah, look, I think you've summed it up really well, and I appreciate some of the answers. I suppose the other thing for this conversation is to acknowledge, as much as we want to influence that and maybe want to shift that, to acknowledge that regardless of how much we achieve that, there will continue to be those appointments made for political reasons. And so councillors as a group will then have to operate in that environment. So I suppose, some thoughts about, for councillors out there who, acknowledge that that's maybe how it works, or how it works at the moment at their council, may be unable to shift that, how they can still contribute to ensuring that that leadership is sincere and community focused, even though they're not sitting in the chair.
I think it's a really good point, and we're going through a similar conversation at the moment as far as the organisational culture. What lead does council have? Council laws have in that, and we are the leaders, and we need to lead by example. When it comes to political alignment, or aspirations within a group of council laws, yes, it will always happen, and I think we always have to remind ourselves that we shouldn't be aligned, really. I don't like to be, politically aligned with anyone, because we want to be aligned with all, political parties. And we need to be, as local government, have those great relationships. And that's exactly how I see it should happen. If we look like we're not keen on the other party over the fence over there, you know, and then you're going to weaken those relationships. Well, that's lost opportunity. So I absolutely have great relationships with all our political parties within our local community here, and we continue to strengthen those relationships. I do, absolutely. I mean, we work very well together, and that's the success of local government, really. If you start having that divide and political divide within your local government group and your councillors and local members, you're going to miss out on things. So, you know, as I said, I think that's so important. But when people are very focused and they have particular issues, and sometimes they may not align with your own, again, it gets back to what's the best thing for the community. If we're voting on something that's perhaps not my greatest of aspiration, but I see the community benefit and I see the collective of the group of councillors and the organisation where that's heading. Do your homework, find out more about the reasoning behind that, because if you don't, you just have an opinion that's only superficial, well, that's very unfair, not only on your fellow councillors and the organisation, but on your community as well.
If I may, I certainly can't speak to the specifics of the regulatory framework. However, you've recognized that this is cultural as well, and sometimes good is not just an absence of bad. Kim has made a comment about modeling good behavior, but it has to be collective modeling with expectations as well. One of the other things that Kim had mentioned earlier was an expectation, for example, that council members read their meeting package in advance of the meeting, or they get called out, or they look silly, or they start asking uninformed questions, and that's just not good enough. So there can either be a virtuous spiral, or there can be a vicious spiral in terms of culture, and it's going to take some time to change. I do a conference presentation on local government ethics. And one of the things we talk about consistently and fairly significantly is holding each other to account. That there needs to be a level of expectation that goes beyond the written rule, that we are representatives of the community. We need to live by the spirit of the law, not just the letter of the law. We need to stop looking for loopholes to work things to our advantage. And then with the recognition that that is cultural, it takes time to change. It's not going to be something we institute today and see results from tomorrow, but it might be over the course of a year or a term, or perhaps even more. If you're anything like us here, you have communities or municipalities which are just basket cases, what we call them anyway, who just never seem to be able to get out of their own way. And you've got others which are particularly virtuous, which always seem to be electing the right people and appointing the right people and doing the right things, reacting properly and serving their citizens well. And the rules are exactly the same for both of them. One of them just seems to have taken advantage of the opportunity, and one seems to be looking for ways to skirt the opportunity. So have the rules in place. One of the things I talk about is make sure you keep those barn doors closed so there's no attempts at the rogues escaping beforehand. So make sure the rules are in place. Make sure there's an expectation to follow the rules, and make sure that each council member holds each other to account, and that there's permission given, say, to the CEO to respectfully challenge some of the behavior as it starts to slide down that slippery slope towards a negative spiral.
Catherine, more from the audience.
Yeah, look, thanks for that, Chris and Ian. There is a question here from Councillor Chrissy Wheeler from Campaspe, who has asked, I think it raised a really good question, and Weller, I apologise, Councillor Weller, and this is the issue of auspiced, politically auspiced candidates for local government. And I think it picks up on Tony's point, and also what the comments Josh made was that there will be political appointments or politically auspiced candidates who are elected to local government. But as Ian's outlined, the rules and the framework will guide and should guide the behaviour of any councillor once they are elected. And there is some tensions there between the system of local government as it currently stands. I mean, the whole process of campaigning for election can be political and also adversarial in some ways, which then makes it quite a jump for when councillors are on board to understand that their responsibilities, as Kim highlighted, is to represent all of the stakeholders in the community. Our communities are not partisan in that they come from all different political persuasions, and the role of the group of councillors, of course, is to lead and govern on behalf of all of the community. So there are some tensions there. I don't know if it's the place or the time to get into whether there should be politically endorsed candidates or not, but I suspect that the cultural review piece that Minister Lean is leading at the moment will examine some of these systemic barriers as well.
So thank you to Mayor Weller from Campaspe for that question. Catherine, I noticed Councillor Gleeson from Moynshire has his hand up. If you're okay for us to call on him for his question.
I thank you, and I thank the three presenters for all different backgrounds and very exciting for me. Just a comment to Tony. I actually stood for council without a personal agenda. And I know people say that's not right, or it's crap, or it's not, but it's actually true. I was a publican for 25 years and an ex-teacher for 10. And so I heard a lot about what people thought, etc. You know, president of the footy club, president of the cricket club. The one thing I do say is I'm not a politician, and I don't want to be a politician. And I was told that if you run for council, you need to run on a ticket or you won't get elected. And to my response to that was, I'd rather not get elected. And guess what? I was elected third, and I'm very, very pleased to be able to represent my community. Just to the three panelists to the question, though, I don't see it as my right to be mayor. I don't think it's anybody's right to be mayor. I'm just wondering about knowledge, though. For instance, I'm only a first-time term councillor. I'm 10 months into it. I think I have a fairly good grasp of the community. As I say, I've worked in it for 25 years. But the knowledge of state politics and then federal politics, you know, when it's about we need to find money, we need to do this, we need to take advantage of it. So to Tony and Kim and
Ian.
And to Ian, I've got them all written down here. You know, is there an opportunity to be mayor really without being the politician and without having that knowledge?
Yeah, maybe there is, but you know, this is the setup that we do have, and I think your point as far as do I have the knowledge and understanding of state, federal government, even local government, that was a question I think I pointed out. I asked myself when I first put up my hand to go on council and then becoming a mayor. We do have to depend on our staff, our executive team, expertise, and other things. We have lots of other organisations we collaborate with to make sure that our ask of government for our community is aligned, so local government, state, federal, we work very closely when we look at our ask of government. So as far as a mayor doing that job for her councillors, well, it's a collective again, we work together. I don't know. I think the mayor's it's a very valued position, and I hope it continues to be that. I hope it's perceived as great value for your community, and I don't think there's anything in life that will, be, this is my pinnacle really, to be able to be the face of your city, the voice of your city, leading your councillors, in living here all my life. I mean, I just think it's such an extraordinary experience, but also opportunity. I want good things into the future, and if that's the mayor's job and councillor's job at the moment as it sits, well, let's do it the best we can. If change needs to happen, well, let's see how that works. But look, I just want to see all communities thrive and do the best we can into the future. We want great things from my grandkids and moving forward in life. So I think it's a great experience for me, a great opportunity, and while you've got those mayor shoes on, you do the best you can do at that time.
I think there's no doubt that the role of mayor does require a specialised skill set, and I think that's sort of the crux of the conversation that we're having today. And Ian certainly outlined some of the attributes that he's identified for that. So, Councillor Gleeson, I guess setting aside the political, affiliation or whether you want to be a politician or not, it's really considering, as Kim said, those responsibilities and how you might engage with those stakeholders. There are a few other people in the audience with their hands up and some more questions in the chat as well, but I might go to Councillor Melican over in Banyule. Hi, Tom.
I understand what Kim was saying before when she said that, your mayoral year goes very quickly and, before the time your head stops spinning, it's all over. I can understand why people want to have another year. But I also think that once your mayoral year's coming towards the end, you should be so tired and exhausted because you put everything into it that you're really looking to step aside and have a rest. And I always remember Robert Doyle when he'd been in 6 years and he went to that ball and said he was bored and got drunk and did some things he could potentially. So can get the panel to comment about whether they think it's a good thing to be more than 1 year. So, because I think the temptation is that you don't put as much in because you know you're going to go again. So you won't put everything into it that year. Whereas counterbalance to that is that your head spins so much and there's so much to do, you really don't get down to the really critical things you're trying to achieve in your mayoral year sometimes.
Yeah, well, look, I think it's a great point that Councillor Malikan raises. I think that perhaps a 2-year term might be something that's more achievable. You know, it gives you room to and time to help, you know, work up that, you know, that skill set, if you like. I think something mentioned in the chat by Councillor Eddie Estasevich from Northern Grampians was interesting, where he talked about maybe when you elect a mayor, you also choose a mayor-elect, as in like the next mayor who's kind of, so it's understood that while, you know, Councillor Malikan's there as the mayor at one point, that the next councillor is designated. And so everyone knows what's going to happen, and there's not this sense of some, you know, ongoing 3, 4, 5-year term, but also someone learning and for a real reason, knowing that they're going to take over the reins in the short term. I think that might be a good thing.
So talking about, you know, have you still got the energy and enthusiasm? I think that's very individual as well. You know, I mean, 4 years first term and then elected well, because I think when I was first elected, I think it was definitely a popularity vote. You know, people saw me very invested in community. They saw me volunteering. They saw me being very present amongst community. This last election, I felt I earned my vote, you know, from my commitment and my hard work and my dedication to the role. So I would not take it on if I did not feel that I had the attitude, the energy, all those things, you know, to really step up to it. It is exhausting, but I do look at it also as a very small window, a very small opportunity within my life and within my career to make a difference. So to me, it's actually quite a short period of time, to be honest. And look, I know there's times when I wouldn't get home till 10, 11 at night. My husband is very on board. And I think that's a very important thing too, if you are aspiring to be a mayor, to have support. You know, doesn't have to be the way for everybody, but it worked for me. My husband was very supportive, and he knew how much I loved it, and I still do. And I think if you continue to have that enthusiasm and energy and that passion for your community, and it's very apparent to the community, I'd say go for it. But it also gets back to others that may have that similar feeling and aspiration and attitude as well, that is it someone else's chance to experience what you've experienced, which is extraordinary. So I think case by case, some people wear out quicker than others. It's said to me very often through social media, how do you keep going? How do you keep up the enthusiasm, the energy? You know, because I love the role and I love the position and the opportunity that I get within this time frame. And as I said, it's only going to be a window of opportunity. I see it.
Ian, would you like to throw something in there?
Very quickly, sure. Every coin has two sides. So there are advantages and there are disadvantages. So whatever the length of term happens to be, ours by default are 4-year terms for mayors, most of the places. And it gets through the learning curve. It gets through a performance arc in years 2 and 3, if you like. And year 4 is either casual gliding in towards retirement or potentially bumping things up again to look at running again for mayor for another 4-year term. To me, this needs to start beyond the individual with strategy, that there needs to be an overall goal an overall vision for the community, a plan that council has developed, which maybe the mayor, as ostensibly anyway, first among equals, is charged with carrying out, but is charged with carrying out only insofar as they are the first among that group of colleagues who each get a single vote most of the time. So it gets to be bigger than the mayor, that this is using people's individual skills to the best of their ability. As I was writing this next book, that's one of the reasons that the personal aptitudes, the ability to actually work with others was so high profile as well. So 1 year works, 4 years work, and for the same token, 1 year and 4 years don't work either.
Councillor Modica has had his hand up for a while now. If we might go over to him.
Thank you. I remember not Kathy McGowan, Ruth maybe did the same version of this mayoral meeting at the start of the year. It was all very intense and we're all very eager and new and running with it. But, you know, I'm really interested in how you depoliticize it. I think it's really fascinating when you do try and be a mayor that's different to the previous mayors. and really explore those abilities to build the team and build your council group with you as being the first amongst equals. Wow, but that collides with the politics, but it's that rigidity and that support from forums like this that actually make it very tangible. So I'll make it as a comment, but I don't think I would have been able to get through things that have happened without this personal development presented by the three people convening today, which is fantastic. I've got notes and notes and notes of strategies that I'll be taking back to my councillors from this meeting. That's so completely important because, from amalgamation, just to throw a bit of history of it, I think most councils have professionalised. There's a few basket cases to mention what Ian said. But how do we professionalise the role as councillors with all that politics or with the singular desire to have that one issue go through? And if you have a politicised chair, which Mildura has for quite a while, to descend out of that, it's not a year, it could be a few more, and 2 years or 4 years would help. So it's I just thank everybody for their input today. It's really important. And when we talk about this, all our councils get better, I think. So thanks.
Thank you, Jason. And the issue of the length of term of mayor is something that was considered quite seriously in the review of the Local Government Act and prior to the 2020 Act being implemented. I do know that the 4-year term was looked at, but there was some resistance to that from the sector itself at the time. But there are also, as Ian's identified, some very good governance reasons why longer terms perhaps might be the way of the future. And I'm not saying that is the position here in Victoria or will be, but it's worth considering and might actually address some of those systemic tensions that I spoke to earlier, and also that were reflected in the IBAC survey that I referenced. Chris, I'm not sure if I've missed any question that we haven't actually covered. Councillor Masood, I see you've made a comment in there about rotation, which I think was in response to a comment put in the chat. Did you want to speak to that as a sort of a final wrap-up comment?
Well, I noticed, I think it was Councillor Bowe talking about if you've got at least 5 councillors wanting to do the role. And I see the role as we have some outstanding councillors who are so dedicated in advocacy for their community. They are really good councillors, but they don't necessarily have the leadership skills. And so I don't see rotation with everybody having a turn as really what you want. You've got to have the courage to choose the person that's got the right skills to do the role. And sadly, there are some people who perhaps won't be suited to being mayor, but I would put them up and say they're great councillors in terms of what the role of a councillor is. So it's always a challenge to try and work it out, but people can work on their skills. So if they're really keen, then they need to look at the skill base and try and look at how they can develop it better and maybe get some mentoring or something to help them.
Thank you, Councillor Masood, and thank you, Catherine, for moderating the audience component. I'm going to just go to each of our panel members now just for some final closing remarks. So Kim O'Keefe, thank you for that. I think people have really found some deep insights in what you've said today. Any closing comments for anyone thinking of putting their hand up as mayor?
Yeah, look, I think well done to you. If you want to serve your community in that particular role and you feel you've got the skills and the attitude and the attributes, I would encourage you to, and please reach out if you want to have a further conversation with me. I'd be more than happy to have a chat and give you more support. But it is a privilege, it's an honour, it's an incredible experience for me at my age to be in a space of learning, and it is learning. You're not going to know it all. And, I think this is a big thing. It is a democratic process. You want great people, but yes, we need skills in there as well. And I do depend on my exec team a lot. I'm not a great planning professional, I think I'm a community member that wants the best thing for my community, and I think that's very apparent. But I think, yes, if you really feel you can do the job and you've got the time's a big thing, but you won't know it all from the start. So don't overthink it either, because otherwise we might miss out on some really great mayors into the future.
Tony, closing remarks?
Look, I think we've naturally concentrated today on things that could improve in the way local government operates, but I think it's good to reflect, where we are at local government, you look at, say, if the ancient Greeks invented democracy, it was a whole bunch of like individuals who would just, you know, go in as an individual and speak their mind and represent their community. And you look now at, you know, federal politics and state government politics, you've got an opposition, you've got, you know, one side of the house and the other side of the house. We haven't got that in local government. Sure, we've got some party politics going on, but if we keep being mindful about wanting to preserve what's different about local government to those other two levels of government, preserve the, you know, the non-partisanship as much as we can in how we make decisions, I think that will remain the most, really, what I think is the most democratic and the most, you know, accessible level of government for Australians.
Terrific. Thank you, Tony. And Ian McCormack, I see you put your email into the chat, which is great. The book, the new book you're working on, when do you expect that to come out?
Depends on when the publisher actually gets around to it. The manuscript is actually due to the publisher at the end of October. It's finished, however. They are slotting it into their publishing schedule. So sometime Canadian winter 2021 into 2022. So you can read it on the beach. We'll put on our parkas and read it.
Any just closing thoughts or pearls of wisdom you'd like to leave us with, Ian?
Well, I'll give you some words or some closing thoughts. You can decide whether they are pearls of wisdom, I suppose. First of all, thank you very much for the invitation for today. One of my company's values that we express is wisdom, and it talks about sharing what we've learned. And the only way we get to share things is if we actually learn them in the first place. So hearing your comments today is quite fascinating to me. Something I will mention, I thought about it in the notes in advance, is there are lots of people I see who are running for office much more interested in the wedding than they are in the marriage. That they put a whole lot of effort into the election and the win without having put a whole lot of thought into the governance that comes afterwards, the longer stretch that comes to that. So the people who are truly effective are almost the other way around, that they recognize there's an election, which is just a very big job interview, if you like. But they go through the job interview as a means to an end, and the end is to serve the community. And to look at as a mayor, as the person who reaches almost the pinnacle of that on a rotating basis anyway, I think there's some real value to that. So I thank you very much for the invitation. I've learned a ton today too.
Fabulous. Thank you, Ian, for being so, as Catherine said, generous with your thoughts. Catherine, would you like to wrap up?
Thank you, Chris, and thank you to all of our panellists. The VLGA is delighted to be hosting these live panel discussions, and it's just terrific, although in the circumstances of COVID, which are not ideal at all. But what is good is that we can reach out globally and we can have people like Ian, a thought leader in another jurisdiction, but brings lessons that are equally applicable here to you, and we can reach all of our regional rural council members also. It's just been a really informative discussion, very timely. I'm pleased to say that Ian will be joining us along with some other stellar panellists for our Fast Track Councillor Leadership Development Program, which is being held again online on Friday, the 1st of October. Deborah's popped in a link to that if you haven't already seen that. And if you are interested in attending, please book, because there's some pretty meaty topics that we'll be getting through. I'd like to thank Chris Eddy once again on behalf of the VLGA for moderating today's discussion, and also all of you for your attendance and the questions and the meaningful comments and thoughts that you shared. Thank you very much.
So that's a wrap. Thank you all for joining us today. There will be a recording which will go up on the VLGA's YouTube channel, and you'll be sent a link to that when that's ready to go. But for now, thanks for your participation, and we'll see you around the sector. Bye for now.